Welcome to Reinventing Capitalism, where tech, social entrepreneurship, and impact meet to create the businesses that will lead to a sustainable future. I'm your host, Claudia Thomas. Today we have Jeff, CEO of Meetable, a company pioneering lab-grown meat. Jeff gives us a glimpse into the problematic of the meat production industry and explains how this new technology is a safe and secure alternative that will help solve the environmental problems that come with meat production. Jeff addresses some of the misconceptions that customers have and explains how Meetable is not a competitor to meat production companies, but rather a partner. Finally, he talks about Meetable scaling plans and the role that the company will play in shaping the industry. Join us to learn how lab-grown meat is not only an alternative that will benefit the environment, but also a safe and tasty option. Lab-grown meat is not like meat. It is meat. Hi, Jeff. How are you?
Hi, Claudia. I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I'm really good. Where are you dialing in from?
Colorado.
But that's not where you're from, is it?
Well, I've been in Colorado for 25 years, running small natural foods companies and growing them. But I was born in Italy and have lived in a lot of places in the U.S.
So we can say that you're from both places.
Yeah.
I love that. Jeff, earlier this year, you joined Meetable as their new CEO. However, as you just said, you've been in the meat industry for over 40 years. How did you end up at Meetable?
Yeah. So getting to Meetable, how did I get here? It's been a long journey. This wasn't a last minute kind of departure. I've been going down the path of big meat, big agriculture as a young man, and increasingly was challenged by kind of a winner and a loser. And philosophically, I've never understood how a partnership works, where you have a winner and a loser. That's not a partnership. And whether that was producer and processor, farmer and company, rancher and company, or employees and company, or any of that tension that existed. And so I kept moving to the end of kind of what I thought was the most enlightened space, but self-limiting because it's me. So I started down that path. I first was with really big meat and really big dairy, and went, and in the U.S. we launched a program for a milk mustache program to try to build consumption of milk. But I really got close to a lot of dairy farmers and the challenges they had. They had to make money, and that, as a businessman, I just looked at them as a vendor, and they started to become real people with real problems. And that led me to Colorado. Natural foods industry was very tiny, and I said, gosh, these people seem to have the right idea. They just don't make very much of an impact. They're so small. How do you take a good idea and make it bigger? Make it something that everybody can have access to, not just the wealthy. And kind of had that moment where I said, I'll try to do that. And that started with the word natural and meat, which in the United States wasn't allowed. We had to have the government change its mind. And then work on no antibiotics, no added hormones, sustainability, regenerative, humane animal care, all of those issues that were ill-defined. And I thought, within the context of a big industry, how do you make them move? Even if they're small steps, they're so big, they're meaningful. And so it's been a 25 plus year journey to get me to cultivated meats, to get that to the moment of, well, what's next? And given the desperate state of the planet, I think that better be next.
Why did you join? So what's the problem that Meetable is solving and that you are now contributing to solve?
So I'll give you two answers, a personal one and then a more public one. So The personal one is I'm a grandfather. I have 4 grandchildren, and somebody better figure out a way that we can practically do this at a global level. Publicly, that should be me, because I'm a businessman from the industry that has been frustrated by a lack of progress. Our industry is very efficient and not very innovative. And it takes a long-term perspective to make big change. And so I looked at this and said, gosh, I think I can get the meat industry to consider things that are in their best interest, that are in the planet's best interest. The two of them work together. And we put together a puzzle at Meetable that, when you look at it, both the meat industry and consumers that are worried about animal care and soil health and water health and air quality and climate, all of that actually have the same answer, same solution. And not just Meetable. Cultivated meats done correctly deliver taste, can be cost competitive, can be scaled, and have an almost negligible impact on the environment versus the current impact, which is significant.
What are some stats that you would like the audience to remember?
Boy, so I'll give you a couple. So we have a planet today that has 8 billion people. Next 25 years, it'll have 10 billion people. The meat industry is growing projected to grow over those 25 years, 70%, from
Wow.
$1.7 trillion to $2.9 trillion. So if that's true, and those are other people's projections, so if that's true, I'm reasonably confident that the world's not going to get any bigger. We're not going to find any more land. We're not going to discover any more water. So where are we going to raise the livestock or the crops to feed the livestock if you need that much more supply and the world's only this big? Those are the horrifying statistics. It's a finite size with great growth. Something has to happen.
And what has happened is Meetable has come along. It's a company that produces lab-grown meat. What does that really mean?
So first, lab grown is not what will happen. What will happen is businesses, meat companies, will build plants or facilities just like they do today, just like they've done over 100 years. They build a plant, the plant has equipment, the equipment takes meat and turns it into food. It cuts it up, it heats it, it adds spices and seasonings, it does that. So the meat industry will do the same thing. They will build a plant, a building, they'll add equipment, and the equipment will make cultivated meat. Very much the way a large brewery takes ingredients, puts it into a big tank, and after a period of time, there's beer.
Yeah.
That's the way cultivated meat is made. So they can do in 12 days with Meetable, 12 days, what takes a year or more for pork and almost 1,000 days for cattle, because you have to birth the animal and then you have to raise the animal. So cultivated meat does it quickly, does it at taste. We have a proprietary technology for taste, differentiation of the cells. And they can do it in a building where there's no impact on the water or the soil or the air or the animal. There's no animals. There's just a cell from an animal.
So you're saying that the animal never suffers?
No.
And no.
Yeah, the animals do not suffer because it's replicating a cell. So you take in essence, one cell from an animal, and that's it. And so that is replicated. It's put in the media or food, and the food, people want to always make people that are against this idea, because it's a new idea. So some people are fearful. when people say media, that's scientists talking. Media is basically crops that are processed. So it's sugar beets, corn, sugar cane, salt, minerals, and vitamins in a liquid that the cells are put in the big tank, like at a brewery. And over a course of 12 days, those cells grow. And depending on what cells you pick, they either grow into fat or muscle so that they can be blended together just like ground beef or ground pork to be used for making sausages or hot dogs or whatever you would make is a normal meat company. So it's not lab grown. Laboratories where people think of an idea, meat companies build a big building and then make it. So it's a plant.
So, so you're claiming texture is the same, taste is the same. It's not different to meat. It's actually real meat.
So the products are real, meaning they come from the pig or the steer, the cattle, and it sells from them, just like it is today when you get a hamburger or a steak or a pork chop or a sausage. It's not like it's a plant-based product that is fundamentally different, but they try to make it taste the same. So this tastes the same because it is the same.
How much does it cost to produce?
Yeah, so today the cost is what you would get at the beginning of any industry. They make a very small amount, like the first anything, first computer, first cell phone, first car, electric car. And so the costs are in the thousands of dollars a pound because
Wow.
they're making 1 pound or 1 kilo. And then they test it to make sure everything works right. And so now the industry's scaling. So they say, well, how much does it cost to make 1 pound? How about 10? How about 100? Obviously, it needs to get to the point where they're talking about making tons every week at any plant, tons and tons. I mean, tons is 2,000 pounds. So not very much volume today. That's the next domain of cultivated meat. Once they get the taste, all of the safety issues, all of the replication, all of those things right, which is pretty much where the industry is today. The science works, now it's scalability. At scale, which is we see line of sight to scale. And at about $14 a kilo or $6.37 a pound. We think that is that magic number where myself as a CEO in a meat company would look at that and go, that's a price where it should be part of my business. And depending on the company, in our case, we're about 3 to 5 years from that moment. Close in, if everything works out, it's 3. The outside edge, 5. And it's going to take time for meat companies to build plants. So that timeline is consistent with how long it would take to actually build a plant and put the equipment in it. So I see those two being about the same timeline, production and scalability.
Is cost the main blocker to scalability?
So costs, two things, great question. So the scalability and cost are hand in hand, but it's also the science. So you could get the right amount of equipment, but if the cells don't multiply or aren't as productive, then you need even more equipment because they're not very efficient. So it's two things, Claudia. You have to make sure the cells grow fast. At the same time, you add the other piece, which is have enough equipment so at the end there's plenty of product.
I've heard you talk about selling the product in partnership with the butchers and not as competitors. How does that
Right.
happen?
Oh, that's the key to success here. Is it's wrong-headed, in my opinion. It's wrong-headed to say that a little part of an industry, just a fledgling part, would want to threaten. It makes no sense. to threaten the rest of a big established industry. Why would you set up a contentious relationship? What you should do, and it doesn't matter what it is you should say, look, these people have worked hard to do a certain thing. Why would you disenfranchise them? Why wouldn't you say, look, I want to be a vendor. I want to help you. I think the meat industry is very efficient and obviously has a long history of doing this correctly. All of the distribution, all of the cold chain management, all of that. They do a great job. The part they don't, and it didn't start this way, when they started out, they weren't damaging the environment. Those things didn't occur. But as the planet got more populated and demand continued to grow, they stressed those things. It wasn't by design. It's what happens when things are successful, too successful. So now they just need a new technology. So we view that as we're going to be a vendor to the meat industry, so that a meat industry that every day wakes up and says, we need more meat, cultivated meat, Meetable specifically, is a viable option for them. They can make as much as they need. They can do it at a cost they can afford. They can do it without harming the environment, without harming more animals, obviously harvesting them, not undermining any of the farmers or ranchers that are doing business today, because the industry is going to grow. Just have cultivated meat fill the demand for the growth. So all of those things can occur if you simply work with the meat industry to show them how they can do this, and it's in their best interest. We're doing that today at Meetable, and we've had about 10 conversations with meat companies in the last few months. 9 out of the 10 have all been successful in that the meat companies want to continue talking about how they uniquely would do this. They don't have to do any of those things. They get to do it all on their own.
No, that's a very interesting point because you are getting into the industry as an entity that will help them grow and that will help them be sustainable over time. You are really not a competitor, so there's no way that they will try to block you or try to make you fail like competition usually works. So I think that's a very interesting angle.
We will not be a competitor. I mean, there's not going to be a point in the future where you could go into a grocery store and buy a product from Meetable.
That was my next question. So, as a potential customer, how can we reach Meetable's products? Is there going to be a direct line, which by what you just have said, it doesn't seem like it, or will we get to the product via the butchers?
So yeah, it will be. So we'll be a vendor, just like today. Most people don't buy product directly from a farmer or ranch. Most people don't do that. They don't have access to a farmer or ranch. We'll be in essence like a farmer or ranch in that process, in that we'll have the technology for a meat company to produce their own meat, and they'll then put it in their products under their name, because they're already in the marketplace. They already have that distribution already set up with restaurants and grocery stores and other places. They already have that relationship. We just want to help them do more. We don't want to compete or undermine them in any way.
Super cool. It seems like you're just another player, and the industry is just growing. You're not eating their market share.
Our intention is to not change it. It's simply to add more options to it.
What is something you think customers are wrong about that you wish would be
Customers, like
different?
the consumers or the meat companies, or what do you help me?
Consumers, so users of the product.
Yeah. So look, anything new, I think people have been trained over time to be wary of it, to be say, well, is this real? So I think there's that, and it's healthy. It's healthy for people to go, well, wait, let me check this out. So I think what consumers need to do is give the industry time to prove all of this to them. So that when there's a regulatory body from a country. Give the country time to make sure it's safe and meets all their standards. Instead of saying, oh, I'm worried. It's like, there's nothing to be worried about. Every country has a regulatory body to ensure safety. Let them do their job. I think there's alarmists out there. There are people that want to say things so that these don't succeed. And consumers hear that. They hear it on the news and they go, oh my gosh, that sounds like that could be a problem. It's not a problem. If it was, the government won't approve it. So I would hope consumers would be given the opportunity to be able to feed their families the food that they think is healthy, that they think meets their needs, that they can afford, that doesn't damage their environment, or some values they have about maybe animal care. They should have that choice. Someone else shouldn't make that decision for them unless it has to do with safety. And there's regulators to do that. So the long answer to your question is people should have options. They have other options. This should be one of the options.
This leads me to my next question, which is there's only two countries in the world that that allow to consume lab-grown meat at the moment, which are Singapore and the US. Why is it legal in these two countries, and why are there bans everywhere else?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So your question, I think, was why some countries say yes quickly and other countries not. And so I think there's a difference in bans, which very few countries have banned it. Most countries don't have an opinion yet.
Okay.
Their regulatory body hasn't figured out what they call guidelines. And they issue the guidelines that they do on all food and drug, and they say, here's the guide, here's how it's supposed to work. Most countries haven't figured that out yet because it's too new. And the reason it's so they haven't had to figure it out is the industry hasn't figured out yet how to make enough of it at a reasonable cost for it to actually be something that can get sold. Who's going to buy a product that costs so much that no one would buy it? It's going to take a few more years to get the cost down. And that's when countries are going to be approving this because it's a real option. Today, it is a potential for a few years from now. Even, and I'll speak for a moment about the supermajority of cultivated meat companies. They don't have the scale to make a lot, and the costs are too high to be commercially successful. But they're on the path to proving that. This would be like asking Musk on an EV car, a Tesla, when he made his first dozen of them, why haven't countries used it? It's like he only has a dozen and they're way too expensive. That's where cultivated meat is. Within the next few years, it will become affordable and available. Then countries need to do it. But some countries are fearful that it would undermine current farmers or ranchers, and they don't want to hurt them. And I've already talked about that. At 70% growth, those farmers and ranchers aren't going to be able to raise any more livestock. So something else has to happen, cultivated meat. So they'll do it later. Some countries are just waiting because they don't have the regulatory process. So they're waiting on another country to do it first. Singapore is a wonderful example. There's about 12 countries in Asia that largely watch what Singapore does. And if Singapore says it's a good idea, then they adopt a lot of the principles, not all the same, a lot of the principles, and you can apply to them. That's what we're doing. We're optimizing the relationship with Singapore and then applying to a lot of those other countries because we know that they value what Singapore has done.
Yeah, absolutely. They're going to follow Singapore's example. I guess there's also an angle about health implications. How will you ensure that your product is healthy to humans?
Well, that's one of the things that, cultivated meat as a concept fell out of pharmaceutical industry. So the sense of safety, the rigor of testing is built into the DNA, no pun intended, the DNA of cultivated meat. The people that worked in pharma that now work in cultivated meat have that same very, very, very high standard for human health. And then the regulators, the governments, have very rigorous, if you look at the Singapore protocols or guidelines, you look at the US guidelines, you look at those, they're very rigorous. The amount of testing takes years and years to make sure that every test reasonable we know how to do that is relevant is done. And cultivated meat is the same as everything that came before it. It's no different. The bar is not higher nor lower. It's the same. Governments will approve this when it does all the testing necessary that government has set up. There's no shortcut here, but there shouldn't be a delay for fear either. There's no reason to fear it.
Which country do you predict will be next to accept lab-grown meat?
So there's a couple of there's two very optimistic ones, and they're not individual countries, they're areas. So Asia next week in Singapore is the meeting of the industry out there. Many countries in Asia are attending. And I think that will be the genesis of many of them opening their doors to lab-grown meat, cultivated meat, meat company invested meat over the next few years. I think you'll see a whole geography. And I think that the same will happen in Europe. There is a movement recently where they're reevaluating. They're saying, wait a minute, were we too either quick to judge, or now do they have new information that makes them think a little different? And they're very, very smart about it. They're inviting companies like ours to attend, to sit and talk through this so that they're more comfortable. We're seeing countries like Germany and the UK setting up funds, government-driven funds, to help. The Netherlands, the same. That are saying, we think this is part of a long-term answer. Let's invest and see. So very healthy relationship. Other countries will be a little slower, or other geographies will be slower.
You've raised 30 million recently. What's next for Meetable?
Yeah, so first, we've raised in total across the lifetime of the company more than that. And so, these are all pre-revenue companies. The whole industry is pre-revenue. Now, no one's making any money. Very few people are selling anything. They're just trying to prove that the science works, the taste works, and you can scale it. So we're going into our next funding round starting in January. We're holding a big event in the Netherlands, just outside Amsterdam, where the office is. And we're doing an open house with our 86 employees and all the scientists and everything, and the industry, both in impact investors and governments and meat companies, to come and see it, taste it, meet the people that make it, and get a sense of the challenges and the opportunities and how it works. It's a very efficient way to have an industry take a look at it and draw their own conclusions.
How much will you be raising in Jan?
We're looking for an amount that will, because I'm purposely being vague, an amount that will allow us to have enough time to work with the governments, not try to rush anything. And so that's an amount of money that buys us about 3 years worth of additional time, so we can do this in a way that everyone is comfortable.
And what will you do with that money? So what's next for Meetable with this new inflow of capital?
Yeah, so it's a great question. The use of funds, we are an outlier in the industry. We are an asset light model, so we're not building a plant. We're not investing in equipment. We're investing in the science. That's people, and that's companies that have already invested. We're going to rent and lease what they've done. We're going to work with them on intellectual capital so that everyone that works with us benefits and we benefit from what they know. So much more of a collegial approach, asset light. So we're not going to use the money and then go, now what do we do with a small plant? Not doing that. And then the second part is an engagement with the meat industry. And that's different. We have planned to have business hubs or commercial hubs across the globe that support meat companies with technology transfer, with developing the plant or building a plant, with the side of it that the meat company needs help on, which is that science and technology applied in their plant. Because at the end, we see this as these plants are owned by the meat companies. It's part of their portfolio of plants that make things, and we're just going to be part of that. We'll help.
Thank you, Jeff. I have one last question for you.
Sure.
Let's imagine you're looking into a crystal ball that shows you the future. What do you wish to see in the meat production industry in the next 5 to 10 years?
So I'll pick 10 because I want this to take
Fine.
root. So if you looked forward, I'd want to see two things happen. I'd want to see the meat industry globally say they need to add other choices that allow them to succeed in the future because they're a business. They need to succeed. So this needs to be the right taste, the right claims, the right price. For consumers, I don't want meat if the demand exceeds supply. I don't want to see meat become the domain of the wealthy and have an entire strata of global population not being able to get the protein they want. So I want to see this product get to scale so at a reasonable price, every family could afford to say, I want the protein for the nutrition of my family, and I want to make sure I don't do any harm to the planet. And have cultivated meat fill that role.
That's super interesting and very eye-opening. I had never thought of meat as a luxury product that only the rich could afford. Not now or in 5 or even 15 years. I hadn't thought of meat that way. So Meetable has a huge potential to help the environment, to help consumers, to help reach different sorts of people with different purchasing power. Thank you, Jeff. I've loved this conversation, and I can't wait to see where Meetable ends up in the future.
Well, thanks, Claudia. I wish you great success, and thank you for your time and interest.
Thank you.